And I've worked in various ministry roles in the past sort of couple of decades, but I now oversee the mission department within the Presbyterian Church that's responsible for mission in Ireland. Going ahead. And various ministry roles from youth ministry to I'm an elder in a local church planting leadership team as well. And actually, the whole way through my ministry journey has been this idea of collaborative leadership. I mean, being a Presbyterian means that certainly in ethos, we are meant to believe in shared leadership. That's essentially what we're doing. We're not governed by a kind of well, I don't need to say too much. We believe in shared leadership, okay, and we're elder-led, and lots of my ministry experience has been in teams, in leading teams, being part of teams as well, and we'll reflect on that as we go. But some years ago, I wrote a master's thesis, for my theological master's studies, and in it, I wrote some reflections about leadership, okay? This is what I said. In that thesis, I described my belief that shared leadership can often be too slow to change, too absent of vision, too weak in decision-making, and often abdicates responsibility far too much. I am now convinced I was entirely wrong. You know, when you write something 10 or 15 years ago, you read it again, I think, oh my goodness. No, I do think that some of those things can be true as we work in teams. I think there's a danger that we can be too slow, lack courage, abdicate responsibility to others. But I've also become convinced that this is the only way to lead with others, that actually the Bible doesn't give us a description of solo leadership for us to do it ourselves, but actually we are instructed and commanded and invited to work with others in teams. And maybe I wrote it about 10 years ago, and maybe as I reflect, you know, maybe in my 20s I was much drawn to a dynamic, visionary leadership, you know, someone who charts the course, who goes first, and who communicates a vision really clearly. And maybe I was more drawn towards that idea. And in some ways, I thought a leader's job was to have an idea and then convince everyone else to agree with that idea and get on board. That's not what we talk about when we talk about shared leadership. And maybe, I suppose, my perception of shared leadership was false, that it was too influenced by the loudest critic, and it was quick to take the safe option. And I was frustrated because consensus felt overrated and unnecessary. We have someone from Switzerland here who knows all about consensus. You could maybe take this, Emmanuel, if you wanted to. But I do believe some dangers in shared leadership exist. But I want to say that real strength of a leader is not driving through their own agenda, but actually being able to listen to others, trust those that they lead alongside, and work with others who might even be more gifted than them along the way. I think as we look at the evangelical world around the world, we can see so many leadership casualties over the previous few years or decades. Don't need to name names, but high-profile, dynamic leaders who were obviously very gifted and able to take platforms and build platforms, but left devastation behind them along the way. And I just wonder if God is shifting the plates a little bit and maybe shaking the platforms to show us the kind of models of leadership that have been dominated the church haven't always been that healthy. So I want to remind us at the start of God's intention for leadership to be shared throughout what we see in the scriptures. Right at the beginning, Adam and Eve were together an expression of God's image. The commission given was to fill the earth with God's image, but to do it together. Right? And the design of creation is this idea that we can't even fulfill that mandate to populate the earth on our own. We need each other. And this right from the start, we see this principle of shared leadership, of working together, not being on our own, as God said. It's not good for man to be alone. He's going to make a helper suitable. Actually, he was designing that leadership of humanity, in many ways, was to be shared. This lovely picture then in the next book of the Bible, we're not going to go through all 66, don't worry, but of Jethro and Moses. You know, this idea, we think of Moses, the leader of the Israelite nation, but before his call and commission at the burning bush, we see this little scene, this lovely scene in Exodus 2, I think it is, where Jethro, his father-in-law, actually takes him aside and mentors him and advises him. And this is what he says. I won't read it all, but his father-in-law observes how Moses is leading and basically tells him, as all good father-in-laws might do to a son-in-law, what you're doing isn't good. And he said, you know, what are you doing? Why do you sit alone? What a great phrase. Why do you sit alone as judge while all these people stand around you from morning until evening? Moses answered him, because the people come to me to seek God's will. Whenever they have a dispute, it is brought to me and I decide. Moses' father-in-law replied, what you're doing is not good. Pause in a moment. I realize that some of you come feeling you're carrying the burden of leadership on your own. And it's not out of your intention to dominate. It's probably out of a frustration that others don't step up. And so I know that might be in the room today. But having said that, there are some mindsets that would seek to lead alone. And these words from Jethro to Moses, what you're doing is not good. You and these people who come to you will only wear yourselves out. The work is too heavy for you. You cannot handle it alone. Listen now to me and I will give you some advice. Sorry, I said that was in chapter 2. He gets a father-in-law, Jethro, in chapter 2. The speech is in chapter 18 when he'd observed his leadership. But we see this advice, don't do it alone. It's too heavy for you. See the picture of Nehemiah in the Old Testament. Nehemiah, this big vision before him of rebuilding the city, rebuilding the walls, and Nehemiah does go first. I mean, he approaches the king. He goes to Jerusalem on his own. He sets out a vision. He surveys the land. But what does he do next? Chapter 3, he builds a team. He calls other people to the task. And Nehemiah chapter 3 is brilliant because in some ways it's the type of chapter in the Bible you might be tempted to skip past because all you see is a big list of names. Romans 16 is another example, just a big list of names. And suddenly we're maybe tempted to just skip past that. Let's get to the story. But Nehemiah 3 is brilliant because it gives us a picture of a God who is interested in teamwork, a God who is interested in a list of names. And you know, in that chapter, it's a stunning example of teamwork. In that chapter alone, there are 40 individuals that are mentioned. There's 13 different groups of people, and each person is playing their part in rebuilding these walls together as well. There were those who built the wall, repaired the tower, installed the gates, put on the doors, roofed, rebuilt. Some were taking a lead, some were supporting. What a brilliant picture of teamwork in the kingdom of God. It's that type of picture we need. Not just Nehemiah, the visionary leader who's doing it himself. He wasn't. He's involving others along the way. We see it even with Jesus. I say even with Jesus because if ever there was a leader who could do it on his own, and yet he comes and he draws 12 alongside him initially. There's examples of other disciples around his life as well. But in Luke 9 and Luke 10, we see it specifically where Jesus pulls in his disciples and gives them instructions and then sends them out 2 by 2 or in pairs. And I love this little verse of Jesus sharing ministry with his disciples after this. And this was part of a training ground for the disciples. You know, Jesus was releasing them outwards for them to learn. The way for them to learn was actually by going without Jesus, if you know what I mean. Certainly without his physical presence into these towns and villages. After this, the Lord appointed 72 others, sent them out 2 by 2 ahead of him to every town and place where he was about to go. sharing ministry together, maybe different roles, some preparing the way, some going after. I love this little example in the New Testament in Acts 15, where actually there's collaboration with the Holy Spirit and others as well. It seemed good to the Holy Spirit and to us. And as we think about collaborative leadership today, we want to think about collaborating with the Spirit of God as well, not just individuals, but also others as well. This example in Acts 18 then of Paul, Priscilla, and Aquila, where this partnership, where they bring Paul into their home, he commits them to being with them for a period of time. He takes them on mission, so they have different aspects and partnership. And then this lovely little, well, I don't know if it's lovely for Apollos, but at the end of the chapter, where actually Paul leaves, and we find Priscilla and Aquila correcting Apollos, maybe because of what they'd learned from Paul, continuing ministry after he had left. And that's part of leadership and collaboration, is that we get to extend leadership beyond ourselves, beyond when we are with people or in situations or settings. We prepare people to come after us, and we'll think about that as we go today as well. And then, final example that I'll give is this amazing passage from Paul about the body of Christ. This idea of, again, shared leadership. This is the Message translation of this verse. God's various gifts are carried out everywhere, but they all originate in God's Spirit. God's various expressions of power are in action everywhere, but God himself is behind it all. Each person is given something to do that shows who God is. It's not a great line, actually, a great phrase to bear in mind about shared leadership. Each person is given something to do that shows who God is. And maybe our job as leaders is to find out what the something is, or help people to find out for themselves what the something is that God has given them to do, who will reveal who God is. Everyone gets in on it. Everyone benefits. There was a little phrase that kind of, I think, followed John Wimber's ministry, where he talked about everyone gets to play. He's really talking about ministry and the Holy Spirit, but actually in this case, I want to maybe broaden that to say everyone gets to play when it comes to the body of Christ and the work of ministry in the church and in the kingdom of God. So biblical pictures, biblical ideas. So we're trying to see that leadership in the kingdom of God, first of all, as a principle and as a foundation that it's plural and not singular. Okay, so we're trying to understand that. And then what we're trying to see is how we can then draw a wide variety of people in who have a part to play. Because we don't want to rob others of the opportunity to serve God. And we can do that by dominating or controlling. Let me give you two examples of this in my own life and my own ministry. I remember, again, maybe 12 to 15 years ago, starting a new job as a youth worker in a much larger church than I'd grown up in. And so I'd been a volunteer youth leader, leading a small group of 15 teenagers or whatever. And I don't mean this in a bad way, but everything came through me, you know, and I knew all those people by name and intimately and been part of their story. And I led the group and did most of the stuff on a Sunday night. I joined a large church, several hundred members, a couple of hundred young people connected to the different organizations, probably up to about 60 to 80 people who were serving in youth ministry. And began this job, and to be honest, I felt the pressure. I felt pressure immediately to have all the answers, maybe to impress people so that they would trust me and my leadership, and to come up with all the brilliant ideas and to relate to young people the best and to be in control. And it took me a while to realize that actually my job was not to do all the youth ministry, but my job, or even be the best person with young people in that church, but my job was to equip lots of people to be engaged in youth ministry. Do you see the difference? And it was actually my boss who showed that to me. He said, you know, we have not called you to this job for you to do it all. We have called you to build systems and equip leaders and to resource in a way and to set a direction and a vision and a leadership so that lots of people will get involved in this ministry among young people. You need to build teams, he said. You need to build networks. And ever since that, I have had a kind of this picture of the way I will go about leadership and ministry. Fast forward 15 years, I'm now I'm trying to orientate a new role that I'm just figuring out, that is overseeing 60 churches within Ireland, most of whom are in the Republic of Ireland. They're being led by 30 ordained ministers who are dispersed across the island. And as I've stepped into that new role, I've had to figure some things out. Firstly, I am an ordained elder, but I am not an ordained minister. I am not who they are. I am younger than the majority of them, and I have not done ministry in the Republic of Ireland before. Some of you are thinking, why did they give that guy the job? And I'm figuring that out too. So here's what I've had to realize. I cannot give these ministers, these leaders, and these churches everything they need. That will not come from me as an individual. So what I've had to do is to recruit a team. And so it's begun by developing a team of mentors, a team of 7 or 8 experienced ministers, church leaders who are probably reaching retirement or just into retirement, who will be offered to these people or have been offered to them as mentors. Now, do I want to get alongside them and build relationships? Of course I do. But I'm realizing that what they need will not come from, all that they need will not come from me. And so I'm trying to build a team of people. I've also built around me, or the system actually has, a bunch of sort of conveners of committees. We're Presbyterian after all, who lead some of the different aspects of our work. And I am regularly asking them questions. How do we do this better? What's your ideas? What advice would you give me? Now, I still need to be the person who takes some decisions, but I'm listening to them. I have known in this last 6 months more than ever before the need to collaborate with others. But because of that, and with that, I've had to die a little bit to myself to accept that I'm not sufficient, self-sufficient on my own, that I need other people. And this next quote relates to this whole idea. Someone once told me that you have a choice in leadership. You can be the hero with lots of followers or the mentor to lots of heroes. Have a think about that. You can be the hero with lots of followers or the mentor to lots of heroes. What do we understand leadership to be or to look like? Paul Tripp says this: every leader needs to rely on the contributions of other leaders who are smart in ways that he or she isn't. Independent, domineering leadership is functional denial of what the Bible teaches about both the nature of the body of Christ and the gifting of those called by God to lead it. Humble leaders surround themselves not with ministry clones, but with leaders who have gifts they do not. So maybe as you think in this seminar today or workshop today, you might want to think, who do I need to surround myself with? Who's my Jethro that might provide me advice? Who's my Priscilla and Aquila who will be able to do things that I don't or can't? Priscilla and Aquila, by the way, were embedded in the culture. Paul wasn't. He was a blow-in. So we needed some people who were embedded in the culture. Who do you need to surround yourself by? Or, here's a heart question, how do I need to humble myself so that I can effectively lead with others as well? Here's a question. Who leads? Who leads? If it's in the church or if it's in a ministry or whatever it is, who leads? Well, there's going to be some people who have ideas, who are good with the ideas. You know, they bring fresh ideas, fresh thinking, and generate this kind of idea. But you're also going to need some people who make decisions and plans, who take those ideas and put them into practice. Sorry, not even who put them into practice, who help to think and shape those ideas. Well, those are 5 good ideas, but actually here's the 2 that we really need to focus on. Or that's a good initial idea, but here's how it actually should work within our culture or within our system or within our church. And often these two things actually aren't done best sometimes by the same person or the same people. We'll know that there's some who are ideas people. Now, they still need to talk, They might even need to be in the same room, the same group, the same committee, the same meeting. But actually we need different. And then we need people who are actually going to put their shoulder to the wheel and put them into action. It's important for us to realize that these things don't have to come from the one place. They don't have to come from the one pastor. They don't even have to come from the one eldership. They don't even have to come from the one kind of group of people or the same staff team if you're in a kind of ministry. And who has the ideas? Let's consider for a moment just a church eldership. Is it the elder's responsibility to come up with all the ideas? Not necessarily. So it could be that a pastor says on a Sunday, we've got a vision for doing, I don't know, let's say, reaching out to young people in our local town, a mile up the road. What ideas? We as a church are calling, as elders, we're setting that as a vision. Okay, so the elders have set that as a vision, or as a plan, or as a hope. How could you involve every single person in that room, in that vision? Well, what we're doing today is we're asking every single one of you to pray about that need. So we're beginning to create a little bit of ownership. There's post-it notes underneath your seats. And if any of you have an idea about how we could reach out to teenagers or young people in this town, I would love you to write down and put it in a little post box at the door on your way out. If some of you could give some resources, money, time, we would love to hear from you. If you think you can help practically in any way, we'd love to hear from you as well. And then you gather in those ideas and you bring them before the elders. And you begin to discern, well, actually, which... You see, sometimes we think leadership is like Moses going up the mountain and bringing down the tablets of stone. A leader goes away on retreat and comes up with the vision. And then, so they go up the mountain and they're away for a month and the congregation are waiting. Oh, what's the leader going to come back with? And the leader comes back and says, here is our vision. But because people haven't been involved in the process, often it doesn't always get owned by the people. So who comes up with the idea? This is just an example, by the way. It's not prescriptive, but it's just an example of how, from an early point, you can get people involved. Now, who's going to make the decisions and plans? In this context, the decisions might be made by the eldership or the leadership team, perhaps. Who makes it work? Well, if there's 3 elders in the church, let's say, and they're all over 70, might they be the best people to reach the young people in town? They might be. But perhaps they might say, well, actually, we need to draw in some other people. So they then say, well, actually, who makes it work? Let's go and ask someone to lead this. Let's go and ask someone. This person came up with a brilliant idea. Why don't we ask them to investigate it and build a little team around them? And we're beginning to do that. That's just an example, but who leads is a question that you should ask yourself from time to time. And I suppose in a team, this is always a helpful thing to think about. There's always different types of thinking that is needed in a team. There's the what about question. There's someone who puts up their hand and says, you know, this church is brilliant or this ministry is brilliant, but what about doing something online as a new approach? And people who love the status quo groan. And I think, we're doing enough. Why do these people are like flies in our ointment? Why are they? Don't we realize we're doing? These people need to be listened to. Now, not on everything, but now and again, just let's listen to that person. We also need the making it work people. You know, the people who say, well, that's a good idea, but here's how it works. Now, sometimes they can jump to something too early, and they need to just let it sit for a minute. There's the fresh ideas people, and people who will bring in freshness. But there's also the warning sign people. Oh, I see the danger. And sometimes these people over here, to be fair to them, are often described unfairly as the people who lack faith. They lack vision. They hold us back. You know, here's the pastor who's got an idea, a fresh idea, and we're going to reach this town and we're going to plant 3 churches. And then there's the warning sign person. But what about this? What about that? These people will resist us. These people won't catch the vision. We need a mix of these. Now, if your team has all warning sign people, you're probably not going to do anything new. If you're people who are all fresh ideas people in your team, you're probably not going to see the warnings or hear the warnings or bring people with you, perhaps, as well. If you don't have the making it work plan, people, then you're going to talk all day and just be all vision but no action. The what about question will be people who just constantly talk about what you're not doing and don't focus on what you are. You need them all. You need them all. And I wonder if this was particularly revealed during the COVID pandemic. Sorry, I shouldn't have mentioned it. But we're maybe sick of talking about it. But in a time of uncertainty and change, we needed different dynamics of leadership and play. So let me give you some examples. In those moments, in the early kind of lockdown moments or days for the church, we needed visionary leaders who pushed God's people to embrace new opportunities in that moment. Do you know the people who got really excited in March and April 2020 and were like, this is the church's moment. We're going to reimagine the church. We're going to do church in fresh ways. We're going to pull it online. We're going to tear it down and change everything. We had visionary leaders who showed a way to go, showed innovation in new ways, and the church needed that at that time. But you see, vision alone wasn't enough, because as well as visionary leaders, we needed reflective leaders, like the men of Issachar, sons of Issachar in Chronicles, who understood the times, and people with like prophetic wisdom or insight were deeply pondering, is there something, before we jump into all this activity, is there something we need to think about here? What if church goes online completely, is that going to do anything for people's discipleship in the future, in 3 years' time? People needed to reflect. But also we needed some pragmatic leaders who were able to realize that whenever the church was opening up again, they were able to work out a system and a plan and a way, and a flow into a building, and when people should abide by restrictions, and maybe how a church should create a system to gather again as the church. And we needed pastoral people who realized those who were on the fringes, those who were hurting, and those who cared. Now do you see why we need leadership teams? And we need to listen to one another. So my key question with this thought, we're going to get very practical in a moment, but my key question is, in your leadership, how can you listen to a variety of voices? Because my guess is that each one of you probably fall into one of these categories or boxes. And the temptation is that we listen to our own voice or listen to the echoes of our bias, if that makes sense. And so we listen to the leaders, and we're gravitated towards leaders who back up what we think, rather than genuinely listen as much as we can to people in the room, but still move forward and take decisions. We had a minister in our church who led us as a team of elders, and he was brilliant, because he often, just to go back to this, he often paused us in leadership meetings at times. If we had come up with a vision or a strategy, a general idea, and we had created a little team who were doing that, he often stopped and said, that's not our job to talk about the how. Our job is to define the what and to define the why, but our job is not to talk about the how. Now, that's interesting. He was trying to say, we are giving responsibility to others for them to lead. We know what our job is, and now we're giving it to others. And I've often thought about that when people get into micromanagement or detail at times in a team. Are we really letting other people lead? Has anyone come across this before, Belbin? This guy, Meredith Belbin, okay? He wrote quite a formational book, and you can Google this, not just the book, but actually the whole idea and principles are online for you to think about. So I'll talk about it briefly, but just point towards it. But Meredith Belbin defined 9 clusters of behavior. So this is Belbin's teams. What he said was a great quote. He says, what is needed is not well-balanced individuals, but individuals who balance each other well. And you see, it's okay not to be balanced as long as you're working in collaboration with others and you know what imbalance you bring and what other balances or what other roles are needed. So what he did was he kind of through psychology, actually, he really defined 9 different behavior rules. Now, don't panic, okay? This is probably going to overwhelm you here for a moment. But 9 different rules, and talked about the unique contribution that role would bring. You can Google this if you want. But also the weaknesses that are associated with each of these leadership roles. And I found this a helpful thing to just reflect from time to time. If I'm building a team, to say, well, actually, I need a mix of these things. I don't think you need 9 people and 9 different individuals who will simply be this role, but it's just an example. Let me just show you what they are really, really quickly. But a coordinator is someone who is mature, confident, and identifies talent well. They're good at clarifying goals. You're probably all going to try and find yourself in these roles here, okay? They're good at clarifying goals. They're good at delegating effectively. Negatively, at times they can be manipulative at their worst. And some coordinators are too quick to offload their own share of the work. So they're so good at coordinating, they're always delegating, never doing, or never leading. But a good team will need someone who can coordinate the details and coordinate a team. A plant is often a highly creative individual who's good at generating ideas and coming up with solutions to complex problems. Negatively, they can be too preoccupied to focus on the small detail. In other words, they're all big vision and no detail. I can have a tendency towards being a plant. I certainly have. And at times my wife would remind me at times that, yeah, you might have a vision of where you're going on holiday, but we need to work out the details. And so I've had to become better at detail in my leadership and admin and things like that as well. But that's just an example. A resource investigator, they're inquisitive by nature, they're asking questions, they're enthusiastic about exploring ideas and developing opportunities. There's a little danger with them that they lose interest after the initial enthusiasm passes. So they were enthusiastic at the start, they were investigating, and then they find another idea. And they sometimes can be over-optimistic or naive. So just something to watch out for. A team worker, team player, is helpful in helping a team gel. They're rarely at the front. They're rarely taking a lead, but they're the type of person you want who will just build community, the community builders who will help people to get along. They're often keen to avoid friction. They're very cooperative. They'll do whatever you ask them to do. And sometimes they can be a bit indecisive or avoid conflict. So they'll shy away from that ostrich head in the sand type person. We're nearly there. A few more. Monitor, evaluator, a logical thinker. They're able to weigh up different options and bring discernment. They can be strategic thinkers, but they can be overly critical and sometimes lack the ability to inspire others as well. A specialist brings in-depth knowledge to a particular subject area. They're pretty single-minded, they're dedicated, but they might offer a team specialism in 1 or 2 areas of work. So to give an example, we're exploring a work at the minute in chaplaincy in universities within Ireland, trying to develop our student ministry, and we're developing a little group to look at that. And I need some people who will help think creatively, some people who get things done, but I've realized I need a couple of specialists, people who've worked in a university, people who have been a chaplain in a university, people who've been involved in student ministry. So I'm trying to, and we need students on the team to listen to them. So try to bring a couple of them onto that little task group. A couple more. Shaper, very dynamic, thrives under pressure. They want to shape things as they go. They bring momentum. They push through obstacles. The danger is at times they see a need and they will become maybe aggressive or overly critical of others who don't get on board as well. They can maybe offend at times as well, but they'll shape. They're dynamic. They'll go out in front. An implementer, someone who gets things done. They're practical. They're efficient. They have the ability to turn ideas into action. They can organize a team. They can sometimes be slow to respond to change and might appear being inflexible. Why? Because they really like implementing their plans and they're used to it. And last but not least, a completer, finisher. Someone who's probably the opposite of a plant or a resource investigator in some ways. Someone who is conscientious and they will get things done. They'll ensure it's to the highest possible standard. They're painstaking in correcting errors. And sometimes they might never move forward until something's perfect, which is a danger as well. They can sometimes be a little bit anxious. And they can sometimes be reluctant to delegate because they like it done their way. And it needs to be done really perfect. Okay. So listen, This is just a model. It's not the gospel, okay? But it's just an example of different team rules. Here's 10 top tips for whatever they're worth. Consider your team. So teams need a diversity of roles. I think I've probably already said this, but when forming a team, think about the different people who you might want to bring to the table. Now, you don't always get to form your team. So that's if you are forming a team. You don't always get to choose your team. So in choosing a team, when you are handed a team, or you inherit a team, or the team is there, then you might want to think about what roles are missing as well. So to give an example, I have a couple of committees that I work with, and I'm aware that maybe one or two of them might lack the kind of vision or fresh ideas. So now and again, I send them an article before a meeting, or I send them a video, or I send them an example of a church doing something imaginative elsewhere, or I bring someone to present something. They're not on the committee, but I say, hey, can you come this person's going to come for 30 minutes and give a presentation, and then they're going to leave. They're not taking the decision, but I'm trying to think, how do I stimulate this as well? So teams need a diversity of roles as well. And that's where I use the elder's idea of the elder might carry the vision, but they might not be the action point as well. So what beyond your team can you draw in? Belbin's quote, what we need isn't balanced individuals, but individuals who balance each other well. So I think I've probably said enough on that, but know your default. It's important to know yourself as a leader. I don't think we need to be so inward or turned in, but identify which roles or which possibilities you more readily fall into. And that helps you to understand what you bring to a team, but also to know what your blind spots are. So if you know you have people talk about the shadow side of leadership, and it's often healthy to just work out, well, actually, I might have a tendency to force through my agenda, or I might have a tendency not to take a decision, or not to work out the small details. So consider that, and as I say, you might want to try to compensate for that at times. It might not always mean bringing someone else in to balance that. It could be that I know that I could have a tendency not to be a completer finisher because I have ideas, so I need to discipline myself at times to say, no, I need to finish this. And that's a blind spot. It could be a blind spot for me, and I need to see this through to completion. I don't get to drop this project. I need to do it. So know yourself in many ways as well. And my default as well, sometimes, just to be honest, I speak in a lot of different church contexts, and sometimes I speak in settings that are more traditional, with mostly older groups of people. And sometimes I walk into those settings and I think, this might sound terrible, but how do I bring the opposite spirit? How do I bring something fresh? So in those moments, I'm thinking, what I will try to do is, this might be a blind spot for the community or the church. So I'm thinking in those moments, how I might be, causing them to think about new possibilities or fresh faith or whatever. Sometimes to those, when I'm speaking to like younger leaders or millennials, and that's what I often do, I'm thinking, how do I emphasize consistency and longevity and faithfulness and listening to older and wiser people? So the default could be, you might default to a certain, in your preaching, for those of you who preach, you might default towards always being pastoral and always how this will help care for the people. And you might need to just challenge yourself from time to time and say, actually, my application needs to be about, fresh faith or missional frontier. Some of you are always challenging people. You're saying, come on, we need to do more, people of God, come on. And actually, maybe you need to think about, what's your blind spot there, being a bit more the pastoral dimension or whatever. So anyway, clear visions and boundaries. I think this is crucial in leading a team. I've heard leadership described as building the dance floor for others to dance, or marking out the pitch for people to play. And I think the way to create that is to put boundaries in place, but also to inspire people with vision. So you need boundaries in place, but also vision. So vision that communicates the why, that inspires people, that reminds people of why you're doing what you're doing. Simon Sinek, the kind of, great influencer or thought leader he's called or whatever, but he always talks about know the why. It is actually a great book. It's not a Christian book, but I think it is called Know Your Why or Know the Why. And he talks about starting with why. Thank you very much. Yep. So he talks about the golden circle of the why. And at times you need, as leaders, to define the vision, to clarify the vision. But you also need boundaries, because without boundaries, people will go off and do their own thing, or their focus will be lost. So how can you as a leader bring clarity at times to what's being done so that everyone knows their role? To help with that, in our church, we created 8 ministry areas. So like youth ministry, discipleship, mission, community, pastoral care, worship, prayer, those kind of things. And we divided then the elders up between them. So we're quite a large eldership team, 30 elders in quite a large church. So we divided the elders up and we said, you're in each of these action teams. And then we said that these action teams were going to draw in other people from the church as well with specific expertise. So can you see the different roles now and the balance of a team? So we had some young people, we had some elders bringing direction and vision, but we were giving them boundaries. We were saying, you're to think about worship for the church and bring ideas and proposals. You're to bring prayer and action. But we were trying to use everyone rather than just sit at elder meetings all the time. And everyone's kind of just thinking about everything generally, and there's no real focus as well. I think this is vital in any team ministry. You've got to listen well. We need to be able to make sure we listen more than we speak. And I kind of assume we all know this, but what time are we carving out to listen to God, to each other, and also to stakeholders who might be outside the meeting? So if you're talking about youth ministry, and you're talking about that with all your youth leaders or all your elders in the church, have you spent any time either talking to parents or talking to teenagers? So listen, create ways to listen well, broadly, surveys, whatever it is, I talked about the new role I took on. I realized for the first 3 months what I needed to do was simply to go and visit each of these contexts that I was going to be having oversight, just to listen, just to sit with people before I brought ideas, just ask them questions, tell me about it. And maybe now and again we need to do an enhanced listening exercise to really learn as well, but in a meeting as well. And I think it's really important as we listen well. There's a danger if we propose an idea, there's a danger that we get into combat mode. So someone asks a question or someone disagrees, and straight away we come into, well, you've disagreed with me. Sorry, you've disagreed with me. Here's why you're wrong, or here's why my idea. And we end up defending our position too quickly at times, rather than saying, okay, thanks for that. What does anyone else think? Let's listen. And maybe someone else might say, no, that's not right. Or actually, thanks. So just considering the views of others, listening as well as we can. And capturing data sometimes, I did a little conference recently with some of our chaplains, and I don't know a whole lot about that world. I don't know a whole lot about anything, you're realizing, but I just put post-it notes on the table or like little sheets and just said, give me 2 or 3 things based at the end of the meeting. And then I captured that and got someone else to write it up because it was delegating. And then, we've reflected on that as well. So listen as well as you can. Delegate effectively. Delegating empowers others, frees your plate as well. And it also lets people step into what they maybe are best at. So just a few examples. If I get asked to speak at something and I can't do it, I don't just say no. I almost always suggest someone else or offer someone else from our team. So I can't do that, but Neil can. Or I'm not able to do that, but here's 2 suggestions of people you could ask. If someone emails me about something that I know someone else in my team is best placed, or it's in their job description or brief, I usually send a reply to that person. I then carbon copy the team member in and say, Neil or Christine will deal with this for you on your behalf. And that's me signaling to them too, this is your responsibility, it's not mine. Now it's my responsibility that it actually happens and it gets actioned, but I'm saying this is yours to take on. But I'm trying to empower them as well. And then I might go to them, if it's a significant piece of work, I might go to them and I might say, so this is your task, but how can I support you in it? I don't know if you've seen this leadership square, but do this really quickly. This is how I think we can empower others. 4 stages, okay? We often sometimes delegate without actually people having seen what we're delegating. So I think about the first stage is modeling. So I'll show you how to do it. So before someone does a task, have they seen someone else do it well? So to give an example, if I'm trying to train up a new speaker, I might say, come with me. Come with me to this conference. You'll watch how I do it, watch how I interact with people. Not asking you to do anything. But then second stage is I do, you help. So actually I'm going to give this talk or presentation, but you're going to do 10 minutes of it. Or could you lead the response? Or could you give a testimony or whatever it is? Then third stage is you do, but I'm going to help you. So I might give you some feedback afterwards. I might help you organize it. I might sit you down and we'll chat about it over coffee and we'll plan it together, but you're the one who's going to do it. And then fourthly, you do and I watch. That's the best bit. We can actually see this in the life of Jesus. You see this actually in the Gospel of Luke. You see in the early miracles, he's doing it all. He's always doing all the miracles, but you know what I mean. Second stage is feeding the 5,000. Here's a crowd. We need to feed all these people. You feed them. Jesus says, what? So they go and get a packed lunch. They bring it to Jesus very helpfully. Jesus divides it, but they distribute it. They collect the leftovers. So in a team, you might want to think, how can I delegate? What jobs can I give? How can I involve people in the task? They need to feel ownership of it as well. You do, I help. Jesus sending of the 72, we were just thinking about earlier, sending of the 12, sends them out, gives them instructions. He offers them feedback afterwards. And maybe this is the Ascension or the Great Commission, who knows? But Jesus is doing more than watching, so that's where it breaks down. But hey, balance, support, and control. Any parent will appreciate the tension in these things. So they need to both support, but also offer freedom and not control. So again, a good way to do this is to give someone a task and then offer them support. So what support can I give you? My tendency is either I give someone, because I like to have a little bit of control, if I'm honest, so just being honest, but I tend to either give someone a framework to start something. So I say, this is your remit, and then I send them off to do it, and they come back for sign-off. So they've been given kind of freedom to shape something. Or else I let them put initial thoughts or ideas together on a piece of paper and a proposal, and then they come back to a meeting where we discuss it together, or it's discussed in a team context. And that's my way of kind of, here's the freedom, you come up with the ideas, and then we'll work out how it's implemented as well. When given a task, I think asking questions is the most helpful thing. So you might ask, what support do you need to get this task done? Or would you like me to sit down with you to help you plan this? Well, no, I'm okay, thanks. But you're offering the support. What time frame is possible for you to get this done in? So, they might say, well, I can do this in 2 weeks. Great, okay. Here's a great question. At what point would you appreciate feedback? So you're saying, I'm going to give you feedback. It's my way of supporting you on your leadership journey. Control, I think, is when we micromanage all of the details. We tell people this is what you're going to do. I spoke at a church service a couple of years ago, and the person in charge of the service sat me down, and 2 days before the service, they were kind of chatting through the service, and they pretty much told me all that they wanted me to say. And I said to them at one point, like, honestly, and I didn't say it in an aggressive way. I just said, like, do you want to do this? Do you want to give the talk? Because you might be better placed to do it. You have the vision. We're like, oh, no. But they were probably micromanaging a bit and telling me, this is what I want you to say, rather than saying, here's the theme. Here's what's happening in the service. We trust you. I felt not that trusted, if I was honest. And I think it went okay in the end. But so in some ways, be fixed on the why and the what, but be flexible in the how. Say that again. Be fixed on the why and the what, but be flexible on the Identify what's missing. I think I've covered that, so I'll maybe move on, and we'll keep moving with 5 minutes left. Find the best fit. You're always looking for the best fit for a task or for a team. So if you need a task done in super quick time, it might not be time for the really, to draw on the shapers, to use Belbin's rule. Okay, you might need an implementer. So something needs done in the next week. Who's reliable? Who's efficient? Who will get it done? Or you've recently had several situations of conflict in your team and 3 people who've just left that were unhappy. Who will you seek to invite onto that team in that moment? Do you want a shaper who's going to challenge everything and challenge the status quo? Or do you want a team worker who's cooperative and diplomatic? Or you want to develop a brand new ministry in church? Who are you going to ask to do it? You're looking for a self-starter, the plant, the pioneer, someone who will generate new ideas. So find the best fit for a task. Couple of last things. Relentlessly empower. This is more than delegation. Delegation is essentially giving away a task. Empowerment is essentially giving away a vision and saying, we want you to shape this. There's a difference. I would say relentlessly empower because it multiplies leadership. Now think about the leadership square. Don't do this straight away with someone who's untried and untested. But when people improve themselves in a task, begin to give them vision. Whenever they prove themselves in a task, give them more responsibility and allow them to step into some. That should be our goal, to multiply leadership in the long term. And lastly, I think in a team, working with a team, make space for fun. I think as Christians, we are far too serious sometimes. And we need to lighten up or create intentionally opportunity for fun. So take a team out to lunch. Take a day away where you're doing a team building activity. Laugh in a meeting. Make space to celebrate a win or something that's gone well. Something's gone well. Hey, we're just going to meet together and, have pizza or whatever it is. Make time for fun. I try to find little seasons in my year where I have more time for fun. So for me, the week leading up to Christmas is just a less work, or less pressure on. So I just make sure in that time we'll obviously do like a Christmas lunch, but I try and take some of my team members out for a spontaneous lunch as well. I might just say, hey, we're free, or buy bacon baps in for the office in the morning and just say, let's down tools for half an hour and do that. But I'm not doing that in September. No way, we need to do things, okay? So just trying to create little moments.